Well, welcome everyone. My name is Bethany Cox. I work with the Wild Rivers Conservancy of the St. Croix and Namekagon. We're excited today. Welcome to Lichens of the Riverway. I'm a little distracted. Sorry, there are so many people. There's 115 people joining this webinar today. Joe's a popular guy and I'm still trying to admit them. So I'm trying to do a couple things at once. So thanks for your patience. I'm going to pass it off to Wendy.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Wendy Tremblay. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator at Wild Rivers Conservancy. The Conservancy is the official nonprofit partner of the St. Croix National Scenic Riverway, a unit of the National Park Service. The Conservancy inspires stewardship to forever ensure the rare ecological integrity of the St. Croix and Namekagon Riverway. As a nonprofit, we depend on the support of individuals and businesses throughout the watershed to carry out our important mission. If you are inspired by our work today, please consider becoming a member, volunteering, or participating in one of our many upcoming events. And for those of you who are already supporters, thank you so much.
All right, so before we begin, we'd like to just take a few moments to talk housekeeping. To ensure the best video quality, please keep your camera off and remain on mute. You can type questions at any time in the chat found typically at the bottom of your screen. After the presentation, there will be time for Joe to answer your questions. And people always want to know, yes, we are recording, and a link will be sent to you on Friday of this week. The recording will also be available on the Conservancy's YouTube channel.
So today's topic is Lichens of the Riverway, and our presenter today is Joe Walewski. He's a Wolfridge Environmental Learning Center naturalist and the interim program director. Joe has been a naturalist all of his life and could never imagine doing anything else. In addition to managing the Wolfridge Graduate Naturalist Training Program since 1999, he has authored Ferns and Allies of the Northwoods and Lichens of the Northwoods. So please join us in welcoming Joe.
Excellent. Thanks, Wendy. Thanks for having me. Again, my name is Joe Walewski, and that I'm looking at the participant list here, and I just want to acknowledge that though I haven't checked it officially, the Guinness Book of World Records for a gathering of people interested in lichens, I think it was 37 people at one pub in Ireland, and already we're knocking that out of the park, Wendy. So you might want to contact the folks at Guinness Book of World Records, because I think things are going to change. But what I'd like to do is be able to share with you a little bit about lichens, my passion for lichens, and a little bit about the ecology of lichens, the biology of lichens. Basically, what I want to do is I want to convert everybody here from just being interested to being passionate about lichens, and that there are things that I think that you can do in order to reach that stage. It's likely that there's a few people already who meet that. By the number of people who already sent in photos of lichens to Wendy, I think we have some people who are already on the edge of passionate, if not fully in there. So let me share a few images here. My intention is to get everybody here excited and passionate about lichens. But my intention also is to make sure to leave some space so that you can ask those questions that you might have. And as was already brought up, feel free to type into the chat as you have questions. Now, I have a hard time. I'm not as flexible as some. I won't be able to read the chat at the same time while I'm giving the presentation, but know that that's going to be our collective memory. And so that as you type in those questions, we can return to those at the very end. And it may just so happen to be that you type in a question and then I stumble across it and answer it, and then we realize that it's not one of the questions at the end. That's fine. Put it in the chat. Don't worry about it as they come to you. That way we won't forget. So here we are, lichens of the Riverway. And that I'm here to share things about lichens, and one of those things is how beautiful they are. This particular stick that you see is probably about as thick and as long as my little finger. and it has all those species and all those colors and all those textures on it. It doesn't take much to make space for lichens, and that the more observant we are, the more amazing things we'll be able to see. So once you start, you can't stop. Once you see lichens, you can't unsee them. They've just become a part of your life, or at least they have for me. And so I want to be able to share that. And what I've learned by observing lichens is that it's important to slow down, notice those things around us, take notes, and share with others. And the truth is that those are sort of the four hallmarks of a good naturalist, and that we have a bunch of good naturalists amongst us, whether you're a professional naturalist or not, that you probably do these types of things. Well, maybe you don't do some of them as well as you'd like. My goal is that by the end of this, you'll be inspired to do all of them just a little bit better. And so in a sense, this is maybe less about lichens and more about being a good naturalist, but I think the two go hand in hand. And so we're going to use lichens to really explore how we can become better naturalists. And I need to start with a personal story. This particular fungus is growing on a maple tree, and you can see that green on it, that is algae, okay? And because of that, I identified this as a mossy maize polypore. That's what I thought it was. I put it on iNaturalist. And for those of you who don't know what iNaturalist is, don't worry, it's going to come up several times during this presentation. But for those of you who do know it, you know that I put it out there. Other people can then chime in and tell me what it is. And there is this one person, another naturalist, someplace on the planet, who said, Joe, that's not mossy maize polypore. Okay, I've been wrong before. But then they said, I know exactly what it is. It's the violet-toothed polypore. And the reason I know that is because if you look closely at it, do you see those little stubble lichens on it? And I was like, what? Stubble lichens? What do you mean? I had never even heard of stubble lichens. But you see those tiny little pins that are there? They're called fairy pins, pin lichens, stubble lichen, lots of different common names, but that's a lichen. And this particular species only grows on the violet-toothed polypore. And so lichens can help us identify other things. In addition to identifying the lichens, now we are identifying this particular fungus as well, because the mossy maize polypore, it is not a home to this kind of lichen. Wow. The more you slow down, take notes, share with others, notice things around you, whatever order it is, the way that you do that, the better naturalist you'll become. And so now I wander around in the woods and I look at fungus totally different now because of the lichens. And I am a naturalist, so I'm an educator naturalist. And there are some people amongst us who may be professional naturalists who work with natural resources, and not so much about educating as it is about monitoring the things around us. But I work at Wolfridge, and maybe some of you are familiar with it. We're up here on the North Shore, just outside of Finland, Minnesota, and that we have a 2,000-acre campus, and that I have been a naturalist here for over 30 years now. And that you can see that off of this 2,000-acre campus, that there's a couple lakes there in the distance, and maybe you can even see the big lake in the way distance. That's Lake Superior back there, by the way. And so at least if you're a drone hovering above, you can see Lake Superior. and some of us who have been here, we know that there are certain buildings that you can stand at and be able to see Lake Superior as well, and then some overlooks. But that's our campus. What do we do here? Well, we welcome schools from all over the state, all over the region, and they come and they learn about our natural world, whether it's to do with chemistry on our lakes, or maybe it's just learning about the big lake and the power and just that visceral connection to the big lake. Maybe it's about rock climbing indoors or outside. Maybe it's about organic gardening. And I tell you what, I shouldn't have even said the word gardening, because it's a full-blown farm here at Wolfridge, and that's been going on for many years, that we've got that connection as well. Taking adventure, taking risks, crawling out on the ice to be able to see the water closer, or whatever that might be. Alternative energy, that's a big part of Wolfridge as well. So we're about the natural world, and we're about that intersection between people and that natural world. So those are the things that I do. And we're located, like I said, just outside of Finland, Minnesota, right there in the North Shore Highlands. And so I've been able to explore the lichens around here, but I'm not here to teach you so much about the lichens here. I'm here to teach you a little bit about the lichens around you, wherever you are, whether you're in Arizona or if you're in New Zealand. There are lichens all over the place. And yet we aren't going to focus it on the North Shore. We're going to focus down there in the St. Croix River Valley and the Namekagon, right? And so we need to start with the question, what are lichens? So as we look at this stick that I've already told you about, what are lichens, right? And that is the question that we're going to be focusing on. What is or what are lichens? And when we ask that question, we need to recognize that it's a philosophical, biological, and ecological question that we're asking, that it's not a simple answer. And you need to at least open your mind to the possibilities of how it is that we're going to be answering that. And I'm going to try to answer it in a variety of ways. And we'll start out with this. You all see a picture there. And we all have an initial reaction to what that might be. And for many of you, you might see a duck, okay? And so we've got this duck that's there. And we all kind of know that if it looks like a duck and swims like a duck and quacks like a duck, then it's probably a duck. But there are some of you who are joining us who are savvy to this because you actually see that there's a rabbit. You're looking at it differently. You see that rabbit and not the duck. And so we all live under this cognitive illusion that what you see is all there is. We live under that all the time. And when I say what you see is all there is, it's not only literally what you're seeing, but it's also figuratively in your brain, what you see, right? And what you're imagining, and that we are all human and we live under this cognitive illusion. But when you look at it, you can toggle back and forth visually between duck to rabbit, depending on how you look at it. But it's hard for us to hold both duck and rabbit in our vision at the same time. So it's a philosophical question. What is a lichen? There's lots of different ways to look at what a lichen is. And you need to understand that there aren't just two ways. If you're a professional lichenologist, there might be as many as 9 different ways to look at a lichen, to consider a lichen. I'm only going to cover 2 because we only have so much time, and my poor little brain would explode if I tried to do more than just the 2. So this is what you're going to get. As we look at that lichen, we want to figure out, what is it? Well, in a very simple way, it's fungi, algae, and bacteria. Or actually, maybe it's not all 3 of them. Maybe it's only fungi and algae. Or maybe it's only fungi and bacteria. But what you'll notice is that I always included the fungi, right? I always included the fungus. And that for lichenologists, when they are identifying it as an organism, they identify it based on what the fungus is. And so they use their best tools to be able to identify what it is based on that fungus. And that has a Latin name. And so then the lichen symbiosis, the whole group of these organisms, is identified as an organism through the fungus's name. Now, you've maybe already heard that I was talking about more than just an organism. In fact, it's possible that there are 3 organisms in this one organism. And so now it's hard. My brain is hurting. I'm just like, wait a minute now. Is this 1 organism or 3 organisms? I thought you were, it gets hard, right? And that one of the things that lichenologists are learning is that some of the tools that we've been using to identify these haven't been as trustworthy as we might like. That as we start to use new tools to look at that, looking at the genetics, particularly of fungi, we find out that sometimes what looked different because the symbiosis had 1 fungi and an algae, if it's a same fungi but with a different algae, it might look different, and our previous tools were flawed. And so we're finding that using that lens to look at what a lichen is, that can be confusing at times. And so as we look at this particular one, the shield lichen, which I'm quite confident that those of you who have been wandering around in the woods have seen this before, growing on sugar maples or maybe an oak tree, something like that, that these green shield lichens, you look at that and you say, all right, I got it. That's a lichen. And the question now is it an organism or is it a community? Is it a duck or is it a rabbit, right? Is it an organism based on the fungus? Or is it a community based on the fact that this is a symbiotic relationship and there's more than just the one thing there that we're naming it off of? It can get confusing. And you need to kind of grapple with that a little bit as you learn about lichens. And the more that you learn, the more you realize that we can go beyond just the two, right? And so if you're like these first graders looking at this particular tree and looking at the lichens that are on it, you can see that there are several different lichens there. Are they all species or are they all communities? A lot of different communities connected together, or at least side by side. And in fact, I'm even going to go deeper. We're going to look at the first graders themselves for a second, because the human body contains about 100 trillion cells, but only 1 in 10 of them is actually human. The rest are bacteria, virus, and other microorganisms. So wait a second. Are we an organism or are we a community? I'll let you grapple with that, right? We might be better viewed as a community. We have symbiosis. And the more we learn about symbiosis, the more we realize it's everywhere. When people first started to describe symbiosis, they came up with the word lichen, and they used that. This was before the word symbiosis existed. And they used that. And there were animal lichens and plant lichens and so on and so forth. And then as they started to understand and they gave it a new word, symbiosis, then they could see symbiosis in other places. So sometimes just giving a thing a word, a name, helps us to be able to see it. We are lichens too. We're communities. So we're lichens, we're human lichens, I suppose, right? And we know that if part of our, the symbiotic community that's in us, if that is out of balance, then we're sick and we go to the doctor. And what does the doctor do? The doctor takes care of us. But actually, is the doctor taking care of us or taking care of the community that is us? I just want you to know that not only are we lichens, but lichens are all around us. And maybe I should stop harping on the whole community thing and get back to sort of the framework of it's an organism. And how are these organisms used by other organisms in the community? Well, hummingbirds, when they make their nests, they'll go and gather spider silk. They'll gather the webs and they'll put it together and make a nest. And then they'll go get little lichens from the tree and affix those to the side of the nest to camouflage it. Amazing, right? And so these hummingbirds, they depend upon lichens in order to camouflage their little marshmallow of a nest. And that's important. And so they are useful within the hummingbird community. If lichens didn't exist, would hummingbirds be as successful? I don't know the answer to that, but it's worth wondering. You see all these moths right here? All of these moths are lichen moths, different species of that group called lichen moths. And what happens is when they're caterpillars, they will crawl around on lichens and they'll eat the lichens. Now, I should tell you that lichens have hundreds of different types of chemicals that are not found anywhere in our natural world except for within the lichen symbiosis. And these chemicals are found in different species of lichens, right? And so what happens is that some of these moths, when they're caterpillars, they'll go around, they'll eat the lichen, and they will bioaccumulate some of those special chemicals. Those special chemicals then make them less palatable or even maybe a little bit toxic. And so it ends up being an adaptive advantage if you are one of these moths that predators might not eat you because you've been taking advantage of eating lichens when you were a caterpillar. Humans eat lichens too. But I need to tell you that as much as we can read about historical accounts of the voyageurs or adventurers eating lichens, that lichens, for all practical purposes, are not digestible by humans. It'd be equivalent of if you ate your tennis shoe, okay? Sure, maybe you can eat your tennis shoe, but I wouldn't really call it food. right? And so even though the voyageurs may have taken rock tripe and put that into stews, and it did thicken up the stews, and it did give the stew a little bit of a body, the truth is that it wasn't digestible. In fact, the only way to make it so that the voyageurs could continue to eat these, because there's so many acids in this particular lichen, was to take some wood ash and buffer the stew. So what would happen is not only would you have a stew made of God knows what, but then throw in some lichens that are going to give you ulcers in your stomach because of all the acids, and then throw in some wood ash. That doesn't sound very appetizing to me. I guess I'm going to pass on that one. But there are some animals beyond humans that do eat them regularly because they have organisms within their stomach. So this particular caribou, this woodland caribou or reindeer, that it has a 4-part stomach, and within the stomach there are organisms in there that it is carrying around to help to digest. So the animal doesn't digest it. The organisms in its stomach digest it, and then they take advantage of the waste products from those organisms in its stomach. Another picture of symbiosis for you. And they're eating caribou lichen or reindeer lichen or whatever you want to call this, reindeer moss sometimes, lots of common names, right? That this particular lichen grows on the ground. You may have seen it growing around you up here on the North Shore. You can find it all over the place. But that this is one of the species that the reindeer would eat. And in fact, we used to have woodland caribou right along the North Shore. And if you go to a few spots further north and over near Croix National Park, that you can find places where some of the woodland caribou still live, and they are eating this. They're continuing to eat this. So yes, lichens play a role in the community. Now I want to give you a little bit of language here. First of all, we need to understand that regardless of if you think that it's an organism or a community, that when you look at a lichen, that there's some language that we can use to help us to identify them. If the lichen looks like it's spray painted on bark or rock or whatever it's on, maybe a tennis shoe, if it looks like it's spray painted on, then it's called crustose. So as you're going through the keys, as you're reading about different lichens, understanding that that spray painted on lichen is crustose is helpful. That's an important first thing. If you notice that it's more leafy looking and it kind of waves like that, and definitely it has a different color on the bottom than on the top. This particular picture, you can see that it's kind of an olive green, maybe a light green with brown underneath. Those two different colors, that's called foliose. So crustose looks like spray painted. Foliose is foliage looking with different color on top and bottom. That's important because the next one is called fruticose. And that if you look at this, you can imagine that maybe it kind of looks foliage-like, but there's not a different color on a top or a bottom. You see the same color throughout. Okay, sure, there's a little bit of tan there, but that's because the lichen isn't completely healthy, right? There's something else going on. So generally, it's the same color throughout, and that'd be fruticose. And it's also, fruticose tend to be very three-dimensional, whether they're coming up from the ground and coming up, or whether they're pendulous and hanging from a branch. Whatever the case may be, is that they have generally the same color throughout, and they're very three-dimensional. So there's three different ways to look at the lichen. This one, if we were to tip it back and look underneath there, we'd see a slightly different color on the back. So this is definitely going to be foliose, but it's also corticolous. Well, what does that word mean? What that means is that it's growing on bark. So it could be a foliose corticolous lichen, which means that it's that foliose look. It has a different color on the bottom and the top, and it's growing on bark. If it's not growing on bark, it might be growing on a rock, at which point then you'd refer to it as a Saxicolas lichen. Now you can see that there's lots of different Saxicolas lichens there in this picture, that we have some of them that are foliose, some of them that are crustose. That's all I see right there. Yeah, and yet there's probably about 5 or 6 species within this picture. If you get out to Sugarloaf Cove, you can walk out to the point. That's where that picture was taken. Amazing colors. Oh my gosh. If it's growing on the ground, like that reindeer moss or reindeer lichen over there on the left-hand side, That's called Terracola, like terra firma, right? Is that we can start to pick these words apart and get a sense of what they mean, right? But you can also see that on that rusty old can that there are lichens growing on that. Do you kind of see those? I can see them, a little rusty orange looking, maybe some grayish white ones right there. And though there's not a name for it yet, I've invented a name. I call it rusty old Canicolus lichens. And that basically what I'm trying to say is that lichens grow on lots of different things. There may not be words for what they're growing on yet. We can invent them. Have a little fun. Okay, if that's not enough to kind of blow your mind, there's one more category of lichens. Lichens that only grow on other lichens. Lichenicolous lichens. And clearly you have to get in nice and close. And so I was able to take this with magnification so that we'd be able to see that. This particular lichen, which is the yellow one, has that little orange disc, those little discs. That is the lichen that's Lichenicolous. Oh my gosh. And the other lichens, they're all Saxicolas. They're all growing on rock. Whew. The more you get into anything, the more complex it can get. But now I want to be able to focus on your region, right there in the St. Croix River watershed. And that we've had people who have been sending in pictures. And so now what I want to do is share a little bit about these pictures that were sent in. And I've written names beside it who sent them in. And so if you're here, you'll see your name connected to that. But I've got mostly just the joy of sharing them. And we might have a little bit of stories every once in a while. But there are some that are stunning images. And it's just worth just celebrating how beautiful they are. And that might be as far as we go. So let's start off right here. Question is, what are lichens of the St. Croix River watershed? So yeah, what are they? Let's start looking at them. The first thing that I did in order to get that is I went to iNaturalist. And I generally just typed in some information, different counties maybe that were included within that watershed. And then I just zoomed around on the map and I looked and I found British Soldier right here. And the person who put this on here is MARKG. That may be Mark G. I have no idea who this person is. That's not my point. But you can see that I can use this as a way to figure out what lichens are around me. All right. And that you can see up there by the British Soldier lichen, Cladonia cristatella, that is also research grade. All that means is that people have agreed that this must be the name. Now, hey, let's all accept that you may have 5 people who all think it's one particular thing and they could all be wrong. And this particular platform, iNaturalist, will still call it research grade. That's okay. That's what science is. We make mistakes and we have different people who are weighing in and giving their different judgment on what it might be, and we learn and we adapt, right? But we can use iNaturalist as a way to find out what lichens might be around us. I love the name British Soldier lichen, by the way. The other tool that I'm going to teach you more about is using this Consortium of North American Lichen Herbaria. And that I'm going to take a little bit of time near the end of this and literally go to these websites. So these are just screenshots of that. But you can see that this particular one here, that there are a variety of collections. And if you go down there, there's Lepraria lobificans, and that you can see that Clifford M. Wetmore is the person who collected that. And that was in 2003. And that Clifford connected it near Black Bass Bar on St. Croix River. Some of you may know exactly where that is. Well, Lepraria lobificans, you might not know what that is yet, but we can use other tools to figure that out. Clifford Wetmore has since passed away, but he's a professional lichenologist who traveled around the world, and he lived in the Twin Cities. He spent most of his time right where you are and right where I am, on the North Shore and right there in the St. Croix Riverway. And that's where he was collecting. And so we have access to this professional information, not just some people like us who are wandering around looking at different things and maybe getting them wrong. No, Clifford Wetmore was the one who named lichens. He discovered new species. And through that, we found out that there are possibly 324 different species within your area that have been collected by professionals. In other words, if you were able to achieve at the professional status, you should be able to find at least 324 species, and it's possible that they didn't get them all, right? So there's other species there. That's quite a few. I don't know exactly how many bird species there are in your region, but 324 lichens, that's pretty good. 324 different species, not bad at all. This is from the private herbarium of Ted Esslinger. He's another professional lichenologist out of North Dakota State. And the reason that I included those two, both Clifford Wetmore and Ted Esslinger, they are my mentors. And I wanted to at least give a shout out to the two of them. But I'll tell you what, the new person who's coming up, the determiner and the observer on this, Otto Gochman. Oh my gosh, Otto, if you're on this, I just want you to know that you're the next person who's leading the way. You kind of know that already. Any of the rest of you, if you get a chance to meet Otto, he's the cream of the crop, right? He's not the only one, but he's one of our local guys who is out there identifying lichens. And so what happens is that professionals support other professionals as being observers and determiners and helping each other to identify these. Lichen identification is not an easy thing. We need other people to help us out. So with this particular species, that I need to go back, I apologize. You can see that the taxon is Anaptytia palmulata. And I was curious, okay, what does that species look like? And so I went to iNaturalist and typed it in, and lo and behold, there's a picture. And actually from the area, from right around there, you can see that map, that there's that big pink map with a pink dot in the center. In other words, it's kind of obscured. We don't know the exact location. We don't have the GPS point, but we know that that particular shaggy fringe lichen is the common name, that it was noticed, and it was noticed by somebody called Blue 543. And I tell you what, so John is the other. Otto and John, they're like the lichenologists of this region right now, who are taking over and leading the way and discovering things. And the fact that John uses iNaturalist to be able to identify things, if you use iNaturalist, if you get Blue 543 telling you what a particular lichen is, do not question it. Oh my gosh, he is the thing, right? And all of those collections, those 324, are kind of represented by these dots. So you can get a sense that if you go to this site, that National Consortium of Lichenology, Herbaria, that you can get down to points with some of these and be able to figure them out, not just on the watershed, but where on the watershed. Pretty good information. Now I want to get to some of the pictures that were sent to us. This particular lichen right here is probably a Punctelia, which is a type of a shield lichen. Common names, I could probably come up with 3 or 4 or 5 different common names. So we're just going to kind of leave that loose. And you also notice that in addition to this grayish one with the brown apothecia, or those cups, which are where the spores come out for the fungus, but there's also that greenish one. And as you look at that greenish one, you can see tiny little white blobs. Those, well, actually, you can see some on the other one as well, tiny little white blobs. Those are likely little they're little capsules that have both fungus and algae connected in them. And what will happen is those will fall off, and they will be a way that then these lichens can reproduce. And so it's possible that you'll see some lichens with those, and you'll wonder, what are those things? That has to do with reproduction. My gosh, so we're looking at a couple different lichens here. The one on the right is a fruticose lichen. The one on the left is a foliose. And then the one that's a light green, even more to the left. Do you see that? That's crustose. We have all three in this same picture right here. Doris, thanks for taking these pictures. My gosh, they're stunning. One thing I want to point out to you as you start to notice lichens is sometimes you'll notice where there's those little pink spots. So the pink spot, as I've come to understand it, is that that's been damaged in some way. It may have been one of those caterpillars eating away at it, and that is that damage. There's a color that remains, or it may have been a slug. It may have just been some sort of weather damage, and that particular lichen has been damaged and turned pink. Cool. I don't even want to guess at how many species are on this picture. This is one we just get to revel in. My goodness, look at all those wonderful colors. How many worlds? I think about Dr. Seuss when I see something like this. Horton, here's a who. How many who's are down there, right? And then here on the rock, the Saxicolas lichens, you see that we've got some crustose ones and some foliose ones that are there. And you can even see the lines in between some of the crustose ones. And as these crustose species, they start as just a dot and they start to grow, they'll grow sort of radially. In other words, out in a circle, not a perfect circle, obviously, because you can see there's not perfect circles out there. But when they end up reaching side by side, it's almost like a chemical warfare in between them. Who's going to grow here? And that there's different chemicals that these communities or organisms will give off in order to create that. And that's essentially what those lines are, those edges as they come together. Now, Scott sent us some, and I love the fact that these are on monuments, right? So you can see this brilliant orangish lichen, this kind of a shield lichen that's on here as well. I think this is a sunburst lichen that's growing on this monument. And when you go to places like this, you go and you look, you can see them growing on all different types of rock. I think this is on rock as well. That may have been at one of those monuments. Not exactly certain, but necessarily this one is. You can totally see that. Look at the lichens growing right in there. And in fact, as I look at some of those swirls, I can see some yellow ones on the inside. And so clearly there's different things that these lichens need. A different moisture level maybe on the inside than on the outside, or who knows what it might be. And those are things that we can just observe over and over again, draw some conclusions, maybe even search the literature to find out what other people have noticed have been the patterns. That's the reason we need to share with each other. So thanks, Scott, for sharing these. Molly sent these pictures here. And what I love about these pictures is that you can see that there's a variety of lichens. Hey, there's that pink again. Do you see that kind of pink? So some sort of damage probably. But you also see that there's mosses growing around this. There's snow. Hey, so what happens in winter to lichens? Do the lichens just kind of die off? Well, no. When do they grow the most? Well, they grow when they can, actually, and that has to do with temperature. When it's too hot, they won't grow. When it's too cold, they won't grow. They got that sort of middle, sort of area that they want to be able to grow in. So the temperature needs to be good, the moisture level, the access to sun, and the access to clean air, really. And these lichens that are growing on these things, for all practical purposes, they don't get anything from the thing they're growing on except for a place to grow. That's it. And so these lichens that Molly's taken a picture of, they're growing in amongst this place, and it's probably quite a humid area at some point. I would say that's evidence of the fact that we have some mosses growing there. I look at that, more mosses, and I can see that it's rock. And so here we go. We've got some rock, and we've got this rock shield that's probably growing there in amongst these mosses. And it probably is taking advantage of the fact that it grows on rock better than it does on something else, as well as the fact that maybe there's a little bit more moisture where it's at. Oh, this is directly on the ground. I can tell that because these pelt lichens, that's what these are called, peltigera, that they grow on the ground. So there's soil underneath that. Okay, I made a bold statement. I said, I know that this is growing on the ground, and the lichens, they don't read the field guides. And so sometimes they're growing in other places, right? And so it's possible if I was with Molly, I'd find out the bigger picture that this is not the ground at all. But my guess, based on the species, based on the majority of places that this particular species will grow, is that that's probably the ground. I don't know. Thanks for sharing those, Molly. And then Dara, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, that these sticks right here, the next series of pictures are all essentially on trees. And I just love the variety of textures. If we could look much closer at this stick, we'd find all kinds of different species. There was a friend of mine, a naturalist, who was with me at one point. We were with other naturalists, and I was pointing out the different lichens, and he interrupted me at one point. He said, okay, Joe, now that I understand what lichens look like, can you tell me what bark looks like? In other words, we all recognize that we probably weren't looking at any bark. It was all lichens growing on this tree. They're all the corticolous lichens. Wow. And here's kind of a good example. You can see that gray shield lichen that's growing there. And then this is, I don't know exactly what kind of tree this is, but I see that dusty lichen that's right there, that green one. That's generally a dusty lichen there. And then also, here's the fun thing. If you look at the bark, now, again, if I was there with the tree, I might notice something different. But what I feel like I'm seeing is that red kind of cast to it. Do you see that? It almost looks like somebody took watercolors, a red watercolor, and they're painting it on the bark. That, if I'm correct, And the only way to know for certain is if I was literally there at the tree. But through this photo, I think that I'm looking at an algae. Trentipolia is the genera for the algae that I think I'm looking at. And that as you get out there and you start to see some of these trees, if you see that red cast on it, it's most easy to see it on a birch tree, you know, paper birch with the white background. But this one, I can see it there too. I think that's what I'm looking at. It'll grow on pines, maples, grow all over the place, that particular algae. That particular algae, Trentipolia, is pretty commonly within the lichen symbiosis as well. And so the fungus in that lichen symbiosis will never grow on its own. It always has to grow in association with an algae or a bacteria. But the algae and the bacteria, as you can see, this particular algae can grow on their own. They just are more robust if they're growing in the lichen symbiosis. I don't know, that just looks like a Martian to me. I love that. I think that this is, oh my gosh, Ramalina. Suddenly the common name just vaporized out of my brain right there. But Ramalina intermedia is my guess. I could be wrong on that one. And again, I'm kind of just glossing over some of this because it takes community, it takes time, it takes professionals, and sometimes it takes chemicals to be able to identify these. Sometimes you actually literally have to take the lichen into a lab and apply certain chemicals to it to see how the chemicals react to help you to figure out what species it is. So it's okay if we say, I don't know, but I think it's Ramalina. And then Dara, I love this particular picture as well. You see all those green shield lichens growing right up there. And again, I'll bet you if we looked at this particular tree, this paper birch, that we would notice lots of different species growing in there. Very nice. Couple more pictures I want to share with you. Karen sent these pictures, and you can see that what we have is different angles on the same thing. And I think that, especially when you're sending photos, that it's good to get close-up pictures as well as different angles. And so I love the fact that this was different ones. This particular Peltigera lichen, being able to look at it and see those structures in that left-hand picture, those tan structures that are coming up, that's important to be able to identify this. I'll leave it at that, just so you know that it's important to look at all the parts, including where it's growing. Is this a pine forest? Is this a sugar maple forest? What might it be? So it's important to ask the bigger picture when you're identifying species. And Michael sent these two in, that you see that on the left-hand side, that circle right there. And as you look even closer into the circle, you see little black squiggles in there. This one is called script lichen, like somebody was trying to write, you know, in script something there. And that you don't necessarily see that one all that often. It's probably there a lot. But what I mean is we oftentimes scan right past it and we don't get to see it. But I'm so glad Michael caught that particular one. And on the right-hand side, the beard lichen. I love beard lichens growing in there. They'll hang from the trees like that. One way that beard lichens, at least some of the species, will be able to spread to other trees is that they'll just get blown off of one tree and get caught on a branch of another and keep growing. That's pretty cool. And then here's Marilyn right here. I wanted to end with this one, is that Marilyn had this one. I don't even know actually, Marilyn, if you sent this one in or if I got this off of iNaturalist, but I just wanted to point this one out because this particular species on iNaturalist was right there. And Marilyn identified it as fungi, including lichens. Okay, but you can see at the top, it says powdery axil bristle lichen. Well, what is going on there? If Marilyn identifies it as fungi, including lichens, why does it have a specific name? It's because other people have weighed in on this. Fungi, you can see at the very top, that's his name, that's Garrett. He lives out in New York. And he said, no, it's a lichen. It's not other fungi, it's a lichen, so he's identified it one way. And then Blue 543, hey, we brought him up once before. He lives in our area, is that he said this is a powdery axil bristle lichen. And again, 2 months ago, he wrote that. I would totally trust him. He takes great care in identifying things and is a really fine naturalist. So how can we learn more about lichens? More about lichens anywhere, but especially in our region? That brings me to 3 ways. And I've been talking about it over and over again. Now what I want to do is really narrow in and explain this. One way Well, this is shameless. Sorry. One way is you can maybe get a field guide. This is just one of them. And that I was able to write this with the help of Clifford Wetmore and the help of Ted Esslinger and other naturalists and lichenologists who helped me. There are mistakes in this book. There are things that have changed in this book. In fact, I think half the Latin names are different now because we've had such advances over the past 15 years in lichen research that the Latin names are changing. Common names, they still are generally the same. But there's another way to learn, and that is to use iNaturalist. And that the way that iNaturalist works is that you just simply record your observations, maybe on a phone. I happen to not even own a phone. I use a camera, and I carry the camera with me every single where I go. I just have this camera, I carry it with me, and then I am able to upload it to the platform, which is called iNaturalist, and I share with fellow naturalists all around the world, and then we discuss our findings. Just like I gave when Marilyn had that one, and Fungi made a comment, or at least an identification, and so did Blue 543 or whatever his name was, right? Is that we're able to share that with each other. And through that, that if I go in and I type in lichens, you can see at the top there, I typed in lichens in Wisconsin, USA. You can see all those red dots. What I see right there is that if I was down around the Madison, Milwaukee area, there's lots of people looking at lichens and out there on the Door Peninsula as well. But if I go over more towards where you all are, it's a little more sparse. There's that gap in between as well. I might, as a naturalist, want to go to where the gap is. Then again, if I'm trying to learn, I might want to go to a place where there's already a lot of people looking. You can see that on iNaturalist that there's 326 species in Wisconsin. Professionals would say there's a lot more than 326 species, but at our level, 326 species, not bad. In Minnesota, just a little bit more, 337. You see where the concentration is, Twin Cities in the Northwoods up here. And so you can see that you can get around and be able to go and look at these types of lichens. And that if you go in a little bit more and you click on species, you see how I've clicked on that species and that's green there? Then what comes up is that there have been in Minnesota, 544 observations of common green shield. If I were to click on that, I'd be able to go and see who has been looking at that and recording that. But I can see that the most commonly noticed lichen by people who use iNaturalist is the common green shield. That's an appropriate name, right? Boreal oak moss, mealy pixie cup, shield lichen, so on and so forth. You can see that those are really observed as well. And here's one of the flaws with a system like this is that you would assume then, based on this, that possibly the 10th most common lichen in our region is tree lungwort. I doubt that's the case. It's just so stunning when you see it, you want to take a picture of it. And so if you were to look at this, you might find maybe the most common and the most stunning being at the top. And then some of them that are maybe even more common, but you just don't notice them very much, might be way down the list because people aren't really paying attention to them. So you can't use this perfect like that. Then the next thing is the Consortium of North American Lichen Herbaria. This is the real thing. If you want to find out exactly which species, if you want to connect to professionals who have been doing this, and these are connected to real samples in a museum or in a collection someplace, then you can start to get this information. Remember, I came up with just along the Riverway, just along the St. Croix River, that there were 320 some species. Maybe one of you remembers the number. I can't right now. And again, it comes from real collections. This is what a collection looks like. That this is the University of Minnesota campus. This is Clifford Wetmore's collection, and that you can see those turny things right there. I think it's officially called a turny thing, by the way. Anyway, those turny things will end up moving the entire mechanism so that then as you start to open it up, you can open up a door, get into there where there's the herbarium sheets. And any of you who have messed around with herbarium sheets, you're like, oh yeah, I've seen those before. Well, this is how they save lichens as well, is that they put them on herbarium sheets, put them away in there, keep them preserved, and all that data is accessible to us. I wanted to share those with you. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing that, and I want to share a different thing here. Let's see if I can get to this. And this is the end right now. Oh, there we go. Hopefully you see a website, Consortium of North American Herbaria. What I'm going to do is I'm going to point out that I've already typed in the St. Croix River right there. And that you can see that on the left-hand side. And then if I go way over here to list, I'm going to click on list and it'll come up. And you've seen these because I took screenshots. So Clifford Wetmore is right there, 2003. And as I scroll through, you can see that, oh, 1973, Clifford Wetmore was collecting in generally the same area. He is on the road to Osceola, Wisconsin. So there he is driving along. Clifford Wetmore, all these are Clifford Wetmore. He is an avid collector. J.P. Schuster, back in 1983 was collecting. There we go, somebody different. Clifford Wetmore. So in other words, you can just go through this. And what'll happen is as you're looking at this, you'll end up finding some that were collected in the 1800s. What an amazing, amazing resource to be able to look back at data that was collected in the 1800s and be able to compare that to data being collected now. How have things changed? That's pretty cool to be able to do that. Let's see if I can move this down. Let's see, I've got a couple more things I wanted to show you. And here is iNaturalist. And so you can see that these are my observations. But what we can do is we can just search on iNaturalist. If you click on search on your own observations or even on somebody else's, you can type in there that what I want to do is I want to type in and look at lichen moths. I tricked you there, didn't I? I'm not looking at lichens. I want to look at lichen moths instead. And when I clicked on search, then you can see that I can go through and I can look that there are bicolored moths and painted lichen moths. And there's even these little white lichen moths, little white lichen moth, that's great, yeah. And then a variety of others, right? And so you can see that there's different species. And so you can use this not only for lichens, but for moths as well. My point in sharing all of this with you wasn't to answer your absolute specific lichen questions, but to give you the tools to become lichenologists on your own. And then to also realize that as naturalists, we're really nobody without our community, and that we're able to learn more about our community when we actually share with our community and when our community shares back with us. And so we've got all these names on here and you might know each other. And what I do is I ask you just simply to be able to share with each other. And before I look at the chat, I just want to point out to Wendy, if you did get in touch with the Guinness Book of World Records, we now have 75 participants, 75 people who are passionate about lichens, all gathered in one location. We've got critical mass, I think. Let's see if we've got the chat here. I'm going to try to look at this now. And what I ask you to do is to go ahead and just put in the chat, maybe is the best way, question, and I'll be able to go through there. Oh, look at this. We've got Ron Plinsky with the Dixie reindeer lichen in Crystal River, Florida today. Oh my gosh, we're down in Florida. They don't have lichens in Florida. Crazy. Thanks for being down there and pointing out that that's down there as well. Yeah. Lichens are just like little fairy kingdoms. I agree with you. In fact, some of the names, I wish I would have shown some of the pictures and shared some of the silly names. There's the pixie cup lichens. There's actually one called fairy barf lichen. I'm not kidding. There's one called fairy barf lichen. When you see it, you'll understand. It looks just like fairy barf, just the way you would imagine. Oh, the good source to procure lichen chemicals for identification purposes. Well, what I would say is that if you went to your library or if you ended up getting the book, the field guide right here, that right in the introduction, I go through some of the chemicals. So what I'll tell you is that there are a couple chemicals which are really easy for you to get. One of them is chlorine bleach, and you can do C tests. So when you go to the literature, no matter where it is with lichens, if they refer to C tests, that's just chlorine bleach. Just take some of that and you put a little dot of it on there. And if the lichen changes color, you pay attention to that change, and that helps you because it might change yellow or red or whatever, lots of different colors, right? So that's one. So C test is just chlorine bleach. And then also the K test, which is potassium hydroxide. And an easy way to get that is to get liquid plumber. That potassium hydroxide is active, one of the active ingredients in that at least, or maybe the whatever, that you can just use that. And that I use liquid plumber whenever I use that. And that certainly if I was a professional lichenologist, I might be embarrassed to say that I use liquid plumber, but it works and that's just fine. There are two other tests that are kind of intriguing. One of them is a UV test, ultraviolet light. So not chemical, but ultraviolet light. And if you can get a black light, oh, that's trippy, getting out in the woods with a black light, looking at lichens. Now there is an extra step. You take that out there and you shine it on lichens, and some of the lichens will glow different colors with that UV radiation. I've read around there, try to figure out what's the adaptive advantage to glowing to different colors. I don't know that there's an adaptive advantage. I think it just happens, right? And then there are a couple other chemical tests, which are like the P test, for example. Not like P, you're not peeing on it, sorry about that. But the letter P, the P test, is actually carcinogenic. And I can't even remember the name, phenaldehyde, something like that, with a whole bunch of syllables to it. And I would not encourage you to do that particular test because it's carcinogenic. But bleach, liquid plumber, and maybe a black light. That's the way to go. Oh, are lichens okay to touch, or can they be toxic? Hey, that's really amazing. All the lichens that I know around us are non-toxic, but I don't want to give an answer and then have you go to Costa Rica and start touching lichens down there and some of them be toxic. I've never heard of a toxic one to humans to touch, but I'm holding back on that one because I don't know the answer. That's a great question, Carol. And that's one I'm actually going to do some research tonight. Yeah, I got to check on that one. I don't know. Let's see here. Are the Latin names regularly updated at the Bell Museum and the Lichen Consortium? Oh, that's really great. So it necessarily takes money and resources to be able to get people to go in and change some of those things. And so I can't guarantee that necessarily that they will be changed, but I do know that in the Lichen Consortium website that they've got links to all of that. So for example, if I were to type in Xanthoria elegans, that's the name of one of them, and that particular lichen is no longer called Xanthoria elegans. But if I typed it into the website, it will then link me to the proper Latin name now. So you can use that. And Ted Eslinger used to be in charge of all the Latin names in North America. I think he has since passed that on to somebody else. But necessarily that's being updated routinely. I got a few more minutes here. I'm going to look at some of these. I just want to respect that people that this was going to go about an hour, and I want to leave it to other questions, or at least a time to take a breather if you need to. Please take 3 minutes. Oh, there you go. Any other tips for taking photos and providing information for iNaturalist observations to help? Oh my gosh, yes. So I take my camera. Right? And what I've seen some people do is they'll take their camera, and I hope you can kind of see what I'm doing right now, and they'll kind of hold it as still as they can and take a picture. But the fact is that when we're holding it just with our hands, we still wobble. Even when you push the button, you push the button and it wobbles just a little bit. There's another way to do it, which is to put it on a tripod and then not even push this, because even that will put a little bit of wiggle in it. What you do instead is you have a remote, and you have your remote trigger it so it takes the picture while it's on a tripod. Okay, what if you're out in the woods and you don't have all that mumbo jumbo like Joe just talked about? Well, this is what I do. I take the camera, hold it with both hands, and if it's on a tree, I'll take my fingers and I'll hold those out. I'll push my whole hand right up against the tree so my fingers touch the tree, and essentially I just put my camera on a tripod. That tripod is my fingers against a tree. And if the tree wobbles back and forth, well, my camera's wobbling back and forth with it. So for all practical purposes, it's solid. That's one thing that I would do. Also, with all of our cameras, they have those close-up functions. I think our cameras are probably smarter than all of us, right? And so trust them. So first of all, make a tripod, bring a tripod, and then trust the close-up feature. Give it a chance. It'll blow you away. Yeah, those are the things that I can think of. Wendy, Bethany, oh my gosh. So far, it looks like maybe people survived me. And I just want to thank you too for allowing me to come here. I find great joy in this. I don't know if anybody else does, but I just love being able to share the passion. And my guess is that there are a few others here who do as well. And I just want to put in one last thing, is that I would much rather be doing this in person than doing it over Zoom. And so what I ask is that when we've moved along in this pandemic and we can come together, would you reach out to me?
Yes. Yes, we will. Yeah, thank you so much, Joe. This has been such a great presentation, and I love watching you and hearing all of your tips for lichen photos, and yeah, it's been great. I think we definitely have some future lichenologists in the group, thanks to you.
So Wendy, I'm going to
Yeah.
break our confidence right now. I think you have lichenologists that live with you too, don't you?
I do, yes. Yeah, my boys like to take pictures of the lichens that we see on trees while we're hiking, and yeah, yes, I know. The future generation of lichenologists.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking time to meet with us today. Oh, we have one more thing. I love that so many of you sent in lichen photos. It was lovely to open up my email inbox every day and find all of the lichen photos there. And we chose 3 lucky winners to receive the Lichens of the Northwoods field guide. And those names are Scott Walker, Doris Petrie, and Marilyn Miller. So look for an email from me so I can get your address, and we'll get you a copy of Joe's book sent over your way. So thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you.
Great. And I'll just add in, to learn more about the Wild Rivers Conservancy and to view our upcoming events, including our next Lunch and Learn, which is there on the screen, the do's and don'ts of prescribed fire on private land. Please visit our website. It's wildriversconservancy.org. And to be sure you don't miss any other events, please sign up on our homepage to receive our e-news. We thank you all for attending. I had 82 at our highest in attendance and 127 of you registered. So I hope that you can all enjoy this recorded as well. A special thank you to Joe. And we're at 1 o'clock exactly. So I hope you all have a very wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.